Okay, thanks for tuning in. This is very important. It's about new proposed bills in the Alabama legislature, some that's going to absolutely impact K through 12 education and, quite frankly, have, I believe, a detrimental impact on special populations, and some that you as parents need to be aware of so that you can inform your representative or your senator that we don't support these things. I already talked about the Teacher Bill of Rights. Look, I'm not against teachers, love teachers. At the same time, just because you sit there and put a great moniker on something doesn't make it a Bill of Rights or pertinent to teachers. I find it redundant. I also find it pandering to teachers during an election year. Most of the things that are included in the bill are already restated in other places in the law. So why restate it and then further codify stuff that, quite frankly, I don't think needs to be in there? So that's the teacher bill. But besides that, this exaggerated opinion that we have these violent classrooms, guys, that is just not accurate. These things do happen, but it's a small segment of what's going on. So to have us reinventing the wheel and having to create all this new legislation, I think is dangerous. Special education law works. It works if the school system follows the law, follows the regulations as established. Let's start there. Let's train our teachers and our administrators how to follow, let's say, the continuum of alternative placements known as least restrictive environment. Let's do that, because there's nothing in the law that mandates that a school put a violent student in a general education classroom. That just isn't the case. That's a myth. And it's not that difficult if the child's behavior is impeding their own learning or impacting and impeding the learning of others. It just is not difficult for a school system to exhaust supports inside the classroom before moving them into more restrictive settings. That works if the school applies it correctly and the teachers involved are competent in understanding what they are supposed to be doing. But the new bill that came out, or the two new that have been proposed, is HB 340 and HB 341. And I'm going to include both of those for your review. One of which, it deals with putting mental health coordinators in every school starting in school year 2021-22. The state would pay for a mental health coordinator in every school, depending on them doing an assessment of need, I guess. That's in there. But what's frightening is, what is a mental health coordinator? Okay, there is a huge difference between mental health need and neurological disorders like autism. Okay, my daughter has autism. My daughter doesn't have mental health issues. So if anybody in the legislature truly understood that, then they would add carve-outs to sit there and distinguish between duties. But that isn't how this is going to work. That I can tell you. And then what I'm going to do is, when I go in, they're going to sit there and say, well, these mental health counselors are going to be in charge of FBAs. No, guys, the qualifications under their bill is that you can have one of the following qualifications. Have a bachelor's degree in social work. Doesn't make you an expert in behavior. Satisfy State Department of Education qualifications for a school counselor. Once again, not an expert in behavior, especially neurological based behaviors, and quite frankly, mental health as well. Satisfy State Department of Education qualifications for a school nurse. So a school nurse could become their coordinator. All right. Or have professional mental health experience. That could be an orderly at wherever, Hillcrest. I don't know. They didn't define what that means. Or have been licensed in a mental health occupation, including but not limited to licensure as a licensed professional counselor or a marriage and family therapist. Once again, not an expert in complicated childhood development and behavior. Okay? Mental health or on the neurological side. The last one, if they can't find enough people through that, then the last option is that the State Department of Education with the Department of Mental Health will come up with some other mechanism to deem somebody worthy to become a mental health coordinator. And I don't trust that. I don't trust that. Okay? Why? I think it's a good idea, and I think there's a good intent behind it. But I think that how it's written, that's just a disaster waiting to happen. And then I can already foresee schools going, we're not using a behavior analyst, James, even though they're competent, they have an expertise, especially in neurological driven behaviors. We're not using this very competent expert clinical psychologist, James, because the state gave us mental health coordinators. And then the only other aspect is that within a calendar year, they have to get certification through a program that hasn't even been developed yet that the mental health department's going to create. The more concerning bill is the one involving sweeping powers given to law enforcement. It's basically a replication of Florida's disastrous Baker Act, okay, to where they can involuntarily commit you if they deem you a mental health concern, okay? Now, the entire title of this bill is what is it? I can't remember what the exact title was, but it made it sound as though they would only be picking on people with known mental health issues, okay? That's what the title would make you believe. Oh, well, we're only picking on those with mental health issues. We're not picking on normal people or kids. No, guys, that's not what this says. This bill would authorize a law enforcement officer from a designated law enforcement agency to take an individual, see, children are individuals too, whom the officer believes has a mental illness into protective custody under certain conditions. Whom the officer believes has a mental illness. They don't have to prove they have to have a mental illness in advance. The officer just has to believe. Okay? I mean, what the hell does that mean? But what's more concerning is one more paragraph down, or two more paragraphs down. This bill would also provide protection from civil liability to law enforcement officers, medical facilities, and medical personnel for acting under this law, this proposed law. Which means that if you continue that the law enforcement officer can take an individual whom the officer believes has a mental illness into protective custody under certain conditions, provide transportation of the individual to a hospital or other facility, and they can keep them there for 72 hours, which is 3 days. Guys, if you Google Baker Act, children, Florida, the most recent one that I highlighted was there was a 6-year-old girl in Florida where the school system complained about her having a meltdown and told the officer to Baker Act her, which meant take her into protective custody because there was a concern for a mental illness. And her mom could not do a thing, could not get her out for 3 days. 3 days, not a thing that you can do about it. What is extremely concerning to me about this is that Alabama is so crazy about red flag laws. Red flag laws, if you don't know, is when under the same conditions, the police can come in and take your weapons, take your guns. If you're suspected of possibly having some mental illness issue, or let's say protective order, custody, protective order, temporary restraining order, things like that. But a red flag law would be against your guns. And Alabama's totally against that. All right? As most Republican states are. But yet, this is a super majority Republican state. And yet, they're fine with taking your liberty. Not your gun. They're fine with taking away your due process rights. They're fine with confining you for 3 days. Guess what? They confine you for 3 days. You don't get access to your guns. So I guess it's red flag in reverse. But that's what absolutely baffles me. is that, at least red flag laws, and I'm against both, guys, absolutely against both, because it denies people the rights to due process. And these are also constitutional protections. We can find different ways to solve our problems, but this isn't it. Taking somebody's liberty away for 3 days because a police officer, and I know I'm going to upset some police officers, but you guys have very soft shells anyway. I mean, you get offended anytime somebody looks at you. I mean, I'm talking by and large. You guys need to stiffen up a little bit. And take some criticism like the rest of us have to. All right. What's highly concerning to me is that this is strictly based upon the judgment of the officer, and then they get protection if they're wrong. You can't come back on them for taking away your liberty because your legislature took those rights away from you. Not only taking your liberty away based upon the assumption, perception, belief, good intent, but you see where it can be abused? Absolutely abused, to where we're targeting people now. And you think for a second that I think that it's accidental that we have a teacher bill of rights come out, that the main reason for it, according to them, is because of those violent kids inside school? Then all of a sudden we have this, going to put a mental health coordinator in every school? And then don't think for a second you got HB 340 and 341. Okay, they're real close together. And then the other one is giving police the power to make a belief judgment with no liability and no consequences for being wrong, to be able to lock up your kid for 3 days for observation based upon that belief, with you not being able to do a thing. So your parental rights as an IEP team member, out the window, guys. We are becoming Florida. And I don't know if we're going to be able to stop it, because it's already been approved by the judiciary. They love it. But Republicans love their form of government. They love their brand of government. And usually their brand of government comes with a gun and a badge. That's how they love to collect taxes, through fines. They don't like to raise your taxes, your income taxes. That's more of a progressive Democrat kind of tactic. Republicans like to get it out of you through fines, through surcharges, through fees. They hide it that way, but it's still the same tax. And by and large, we're picking on poor people the most, because that's who can't pay these fines, and that's who end up cycled and ground up by nonsense like this. This is wrong. I'm going to put these up there, guys. Read this. Think about that. I don't trust police to make the Supreme Court has already determined that police don't even need to know the law. They just have to sort of think they're getting it right, because it's not their job to know the law, guys. I know you think that they're law enforcement. They are law enforcement, but more on their perception of what the law is. Once you're arrested, that's up to the judge and the attorneys to figure out whether law was violated, whether the elements were met. So it's really the lawyers and the judge that make a determination of what law is, not law enforcement. Law enforcement is just sort of, hairs on the back of your neck. I think I got it right. And now we're going to give them power to take away your liberty and lock you up for 3 days. Wrong. Call your legislature. Call your senator. Call your legislator. Let them know that you're against. If I was to have my preference, I'd rather see the teacher bill of rights go through, because that's just pandering to teachers. But the ones I really don't want to see, the mental health coordinator thing, that's just going to be a boondoggle and just make my life more difficult, and then your life as an IEP team member more difficult, because it just adds another layer of bureaucratic nonsense we have to get through in order to get what we really need with regards to the proper behavioral based services that work for our kids. But the one that's damaging is the one involving police being able to take your child into protective custody for 3 days and not a damn thing you can do about it.